Enjoy your time here and find peace in the stories we tell. If you liked the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. When my father married me off to Master Dominic Dwan, I had just turned 20, while he was already 50. Everyone said this was a match made in heaven. The Dwan family was wealthy and prosperous. Even though I was to fill the position of the late first wife, rather than be a primary wife from the start, the position offered enough status and glory. In the wedding hall, Dominic's body was hunched over. When his aged hand grasped my fingertips, I lowered my eyes and smiled faintly. Inside, however, my heart was as cold as ice. He was 30 years older than me, an age gap large enough for him to be my grandfather. But what did it matter? They thought that by throwing me to an old man, they could bind my life forever. Little did they know, this suited my plans perfectly. A young husband might be troublesome and difficult to leave, but an old man would die soon. After receiving the betrothal gifts from the Dwan family, my father leisurely announced the news during dinner. "Daughter, I have arranged a very good marriage for you." He mimicked the mannerisms of the local elite, stroking the sparse hairs on his chin. His face was greasy, and his smile was full of pride. The Dwan family were the most prominent merchants in Lijo. From silk shops and rice stalls to pharmacies, 6 out of 10 shops in the city belonged to them. My father insisted, "Be going there. You will be the mistress of the household and enjoy a lifetime of fortune." I put down my chopsticks and deliberately asked, "Which young master of the Dwan family are you referring to?" The smile on his face froze, and he awkwardly stroked his beard. "Humph, those younger sons are immature and lack talent. I have chosen Master Dominic, who is in his prime." "Oh, is 50 considered being in one's prime?" I chuckled softly. "Father, didn't you just celebrate your 40th birthday last month and complain about being old and frail?" Beside him, the concubine Vivian suddenly slammed her chopsticks onto the table. "Anna, why would you speak like that? Your father is only thinking of your future," she argued. "Master Dominic is the head of the house. Being the mistress of such a family is much better than marrying a young boy and having to constantly watch others' expressions." I raised my head and looked at Vivian calmly. "If you are so anxious, concubine Zhang, why don't you marry him yourself?" I added casually, "I heard Master Dominic is very fond of young beauties. Last year, he even took a concubine 2 years younger than you." My father suddenly slapped the table. "Impudent," he shouted. "If your birth chart had not perfectly matched Dominic's, the old man would never have looked at a girl like you." I laughed bitterly at the mention of the birth chart. I knew my father had simply found a fortune teller to spread rumors just to climb the social ladder. He turned pale with rage. "Marriages are decided by parents. You have no right to argue." Vivian immediately chimed in, soothing him. "Master, do not hurt your health over her." She turned to me with a sneer. "You have a heart higher than the sky. Because you spend your days in the streets, you no longer look like a noble daughter." I clenched my sleeves, though my face remained calm. At 5 years old, I had followed my father through every alley selling spices. By 12, I was managing the shop, and by 16, I was traveling north alone for business. Now that he wore fine silk, he dared to call me an embarrassment. My eyes fell on the empty seat beside Vivian. My father was desperate to kick me out, and I wondered who he was making room for. That seat should have belonged to his precious son, Harrison, who was likely loitering in some brothel. Vivian reacted as if I had stepped on her tail. "Know your place. The Liu family estate will eventually go to Harrison. That parasite." I cut her off coldly. "Who earned 60% of the shop's profits last year, and whose son was being chased by gamblers for debts just last month?" My father's face darkened like cold charcoal. "You are insolent. I have indulged you for too long, causing you to forget your duty as a daughter," he declared. "From now on, you are not allowed to touch the shop's business. The marriage to the Dwan family will proceed whether you like it or not." I stood up and turned to look at the home I had protected with all my heart. The spacious rooms, the carved pierwood, and the drooping begonias were the results of my hard work over the years. Now, my father was simply handing it all over to a fool like Harrison. "Father," I asked one last time, "do you remember who knelt in the snow to beg the pharmacy manager for medicine when you had a high fever years ago?" He turned his head away, showing a flicker of guilt. Vivian's piercing voice rang out. "Oh, stop playing the filial daughter. If you were truly filial, you would obediently step into the wedding sedan." I did not look back as I walked out of the hall. Behind me, the sound of breaking dishes echoed. The wedding was set for 3 months later. My father immediately revoked my management rights and ordered the servants to clear out the male clothing I usually wore. In the courtyard, several stout servants were throwing my clothes into a fire. I watched as the flames swallowed the garments, which curled like the years I had risked my life for the Liu family brand. Everything was turning to ash. I was told that from now on, I had to learn how to be a proper mistress of a household. I turned around to see an old woman with silver hair standing under the corridor. She wore simple clothes and no jewelry, yet her aura was commanding. She was Matron Teresa, sent by my father to teach me the rules. Teresa had served in the imperial palace for years and possessed a natural severity. On the first day, she placed 3 books for women on my head to teach me how to stand. "Do you know why you must wear the books?" she asked. "To maintain a dignified posture." I replied. "Wrong." She suddenly pulled one book away, causing my balance to shift. "It is so you understand that a woman must always carry more weight than a man to establish herself." My father occasionally came to watch my training. I heard him scoffing from the corridor. If she had been this obedient earlier, she wouldn't have been such an eyesore. Matron Teresa unexpectedly raised her voice. "Young miss, lower your back by 3 degrees. Remember, the lower you bow, the more strength you will have when you stand up." A month passed, and the calluses on my fingertips gradually faded. Previously, I had used a simple wooden pin to hold my hair for work, but now I had to learn to style it into complex buns. In the bronze mirror, the jade ornaments in my hair were dazzling. For a moment, my reflection seemed to merge with the young girl who once held an umbrella in the rain, struggling to protect her goods. Back then, my name wasn't even Annabelle. I didn't even have enough money for a clean handkerchief. Now, I sat in a fragrant room, learning to pat my lips with scented silk. I laughed bitterly, but Teresa, standing behind the mirror, spoke. "For a poor girl, learning etiquette is a luxury. But for a rich girl, not knowing it is a sin. Since you have tasted the former, you should understand how precious the latter is." Once my hair was done and scented with osmanthus oil, the jade hairpins shone brightly. Teresa bowed. "Young miss, you have learned enough. It is time for this old servant to leave. My skills are still crude compared to noble ladies raised in luxury," I said, quietly observing her expression. Her usually stern face softened slightly, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. "A rigid beauty is just a wooden doll." Her words shook my heart, and I realized she was giving me advice. She meant that a sharp sword breaks easily. It was better to be like a peacock embroidered on silk, where people only saw the splendor, never noticing the claws hidden beneath the feathers. The next day, I dressed formally, choosing the outfit and jewelry Teresa had selected for me. In the mirror, I looked like a blooming peach blossom, my gentleness mixed with a hint of spirit. As soon as I entered the main hall, I performed a graceful bow. "Daughter greets father." My father appraised me from head to toe. A satisfied smile played on his lips. "Good, this is the pearl of the Liu family." I lowered my head and smiled. I was foolish before, but now I understand father's hard work. A woman should be like water, taking the shape of whatever vessel she is in. My father's eyes reddened, and he seemed touched. "My good daughter." "Father," I interrupted him gently. "I am grown now. You should call me Annabelle. Since childhood, my name has been Anna. My father used to say that a girl in a poor family must live like a boy and have spirit to survive." Later, when the Liu family became wealthy and the thatched roof was replaced with glazed tiles, his attitude changed. He claimed the name Anna was too hard and brittle. He invited a scholar to rename me. The scholar suggested Annabelle, saying it sounded elegant, like light smoke in spring or willow catkins drifting in the breeze, blossoms with nowhere to land. My father praised it endlessly, not realizing that smoke and catkins were rootless things that would vanish with a single gust of wind. Meanwhile, Vivian's son had been named Harrison. Harrison was born to hold the mountains of gold and silver belonging to the Liu family. Vivian mocked me from the side. The master found a great teacher to turn a wild bird into a phoenix in less than a month. I turned to look at her, my gaze as soft as water, without a hint of my former sharpness. "Concubine, you must be joking. I only hope to establish myself in the Dwan family so I can help my younger brother in the future." I paused, then added, "I heard father intends to promote you to his legal wife." My father nodded. "Yes, Vivian has given me a son and served me for years. She deserves the status. It is appropriate." I agreed, but then shifted my tone. "However, the Dwan family is prestigious and despises those who climb social ladders too quickly. If father promotes a concubine right as I marry out, outsiders might think the Liu family is only targeting the Dwan family's assets." These words were blunt, and my father's expression immediately changed. Vivian stomped her feet in frustration. Master, don't listen to this wench. She just doesn't want me to be the legal wife. Shut up. My father snapped at her. He thought for a moment and then spoke gently to me. Annabelle, your reasoning is sound. The promotion will be postponed for now. Vivian turned green with rage, but her pouting and complaints could not sway him even a little. I didn't return to my room but went to the side wing instead. When I pushed the door open, Teresa was packing her bags. I stepped forward and gently held her hand. Matron, are you leaving so soon? She looked at me with a faint, bitter smile. After 30 years in the palace, my worldly ties have long been severed. I am now just a drifting leaf. Hearing this, I took a teacup from the table and solemnly knelt before her. Matron, if you do not mind, I would like to be your daughter and care for you until the end of your days. Teresa looked at me, chuckled softly, took the tea, and drank it all. I had traveled with my father since I was young and was used to handling things myself, but I couldn't easily take my core staff from the shop with me. Finding Teresa was a blessing from heaven, a powerful ally. When my father learned of this, he was overjoyed. In his eyes it only proved that I had truly changed my ways. Since Teresa had served in the palace, having her as my dowry maid would bring honor to the Liu family. In recent days, I had been as obedient as a true noble lady, making him almost forget the daughter who once dared to slam the table and argue with him. With only half a month left until the wedding, I suggested visiting the shop one last time. Seeing his hesitation, I promised to keep my face veiled. Father, the managers were trained by me. I should give them final instructions so they won't become slack. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He likely thought my visit would reassure the old staff so they would continue to work hard for the Liu family. As expected, he nodded. Very well, return early. I stood before the spice shop, quietly staring at the sign that read Liu's fragrance shop. 5 years ago, I had stood in this very spot, tiptoeing to help my father hang that sign. Back then, he stroked my head and told me that this shop would be our sanctuary and our capital for building a life. I never imagined that the capital would increase 100-fold, while the person who hung the sign was about to be kicked out. It was a mockery. I hadn't expected the betrayal to happen between father and daughter. In the drying yard, manager Tobias' jaw was hunched over, sorting spices in his coarse blue cloth clothes. Manager Tobias, I called out softly. He turned around, looking dazed at the sight of my fine clothes. I lifted the veil from my hat, and his dull eyes immediately lit up. He lowered his voice and looked around warily. Why have you come? I came to visit, I said frowning. Why are you dressed like a common laborer? Tobias smiled bitterly. Last month, the master suddenly summoned me and told me to hand over my manager's medallion to Simon Zhang, concubine Zhang's nephew. From then on, I had to follow Simon's orders. The very next day, Simon pushed me to the drying yard to work as a laborer. Simon Zhang was a 30-year-old delinquent who spent his days getting into trouble. I wondered how such a man had become the head manager. It seemed Vivian was very good at whispering in my father's ear, or perhaps my father was determined to eliminate my trusted allies. Tobias pulled a small notebook from his robe. Young mistress, look, these are the entry and exit logs for the past month. The new manager changed the sourcing route, claiming to save 30% in costs, but the quality of the agar wood in the warehouse is less than half of what it was last year. I looked at the notes in his book, my heart filled with bitterness. I realized my father had truly grown old. A head manager needed to coordinate goods and distribute funds. How could a thug like Simon handle such things? I pulled out a prepared banknote from my sleeve and pressed it into his hand. Tobias, you must have heard I am marrying into the Dwan family. Are you willing to endure a little longer for my sake? He felt ashamed. I cannot accept such a large favor. I pressed his hand, preventing his refusal. Take it. Without you guarding the fragrance shop all these years, the Liu family wouldn't be where they are today. You deserve it. Tobias originally had his own spice shop but couldn't stand alone in the merchant world. I had advocated for its acquisition and promoted him to manager. He knew the trade well and was a loyal man. I could not afford to lose such an ally. Once he accepted the banknote, I pulled out several more. Divide this money among the men below, I told him. They must have been suppressed lately. This is a token of my appreciation. Tobias's voice choked with emotion. Do not worry, young mistress. I will report any movements immediately. He lowered his voice. That's Simon. He doesn't even understand the heat required for drying incense. In times of chaos, one truly sees people's hearts. Reassuring those who followed me personally was far more effective. It was a pity time was short and my father was watching closely. I had to entrust everything to Tobias. After leaving the fragrance shop, I went straight to the bamboo shop. As expected, the manager there, Silas Key, had also been replaced. It was the same tactic, demoting him to a laborer first. Once they couldn't stand it anymore, they would be eliminated. Silas was a man I had trained myself. He was in his early 30s and physically strong. He didn't mind the manual labor, but he was resentful. Fat Harrison, he complained. He's a gambler and drunkard who knows nothing about business. He was promoted just like Simon Jong. Only because he is good at flattery. I could predict that within 3 years, the entire brand would face a crisis. I used the same method and pressed 2,000 silvertails into Silas's hand. He insisted on refusing. Mistress, you have already helped me too much. I firmly insisted. Your 2 children are of school age. Take it. Do not let them suffer. Silas looked at me with a pained expression. It is unjust. He lamented, that such a good mistress is being suppressed just because she is a woman. Heaven has no eyes. I stopped him from saying more and gave him some extra silver to share with his brothers in the bamboo shop. This trip had allowed me to settle things with those who had fought alongside me, but my personal purse was now empty. As the wedding day approached, Vivian tried to hinder me by convincing my father to keep a large portion of my dowry. I simply told him, Father, one must give up something to catch a wolf. This made him willing to add even more to my dowry. If he wanted to cling to a higher power, he had to invest. Sending me into the Dwan family empty-handed would only make him look bad. Jingzhou and Lizhou were only 3 days apart. Normally, a brother should carry the bride to the set-in, but Vivian objected, claiming her precious son was too tired. That was fine, as I didn't want him to anyway. Standing before the Liu Estate's gate, I looked back at the place where I had grown up for years, then turned as the veil was lowered. As I stepped down the stairs, I suddenly smelled the familiar scent of agarwood and bamboo leaves. Miss Liu, excuse me. A long-fingered hand reached out from the gap in the veil. On the right thumb, there was a red mole the size of a sesame seed. My whole body shook. It was Damien Dwan. I thought the Dwan family would send a minor relative to fetch the bride, but the young master had come himself. I am here on behalf of my father to escort the bride, Damien said. Please place your hand on mine and watch the steps. His voice was polite and gentle, yet it carried a sense of distance as if we had never met. Thank you, young master, I replied softly. I placed my hand on the back of his and could clearly feel the skin beneath my fingertips tighten. When we stopped at the relay station to rest, I removed my veil. As soon as I looked up, I saw Damien pretending to observe me casually. I smiled gently at him. Is something wrong, young master? He immediately looked away, his voice stiff. Just looking at you, it reminded me of an old friend. Oh, I chuckled softly, my tone indifferent. The old friend you speak of. She must have liked wearing male clothing, had a loud voice, a brash personality, and enjoyed making friends with strange people at the docks. Under my wedding dress, my hands clenched my skirt. In my memory, a little girl in tattered clothes was tiptoeing and waving her hands desperately. 2 drunken thugs were trying to take the spice bags from her carrying pole with ill intentions. I was 14 then and suddenly came up with a plan. I called out loudly to a young man in silk robes who was passing by. Brother, I am over here. My heart was practically in my throat. The young man stopped and immediately walked over. Under the suspicious gazes of the drunks, he closed his fan and lightly tapped my forehead. You silly girl, he said with a smile, sneaking out to play again. Let's go home. His 2 attendants quietly picked up my carrying pole. I walked away holding his arm until we reached a crossroads, then quickly let go. Thank you, young master, for saving me. My voice was still shaking with fear. He handed me a handkerchief. There is a tea house at the 3rd alley east of the docks. The manager is an old friend of mine. Then he put a coin in my hand. Take this coin, and he will give you a bowl of cool tea. I later threaded that coin, still warm from his hand, and wore it around my neck. That was the first time I met Damien. That old friend sounds like an interesting woman, I remarked. Damien suddenly turned around, his gaze burning. She liked eating osmanthus cakes from the East Street but complained they were too sweet and would cause toothaches if she ate too many. She liked to tuck flower petals into her ledgers as bookmarks, saying it made her mood better when she checked the accounts. Young Master Dwan. I interrupted him. It is getting late. Damien immediately fell silent, his hands clenched until they were white. We faced each other in silence. with only the sound of the wind rustling the old locust tree at the relay station. There was a time when I followed him everywhere. During a bitter winter at the foot of Mount Changling, he warmed wine for me, snowflakes clinging to his eyebrows. In the summer at Angkwan Temple, when I tied a red string for a prayer, he quietly added money to the incense oil. The person from the past was right in front of me, but hearts had changed and the world had moved on. The scruffy girl who carried a pole was now wearing a phoenix crown and a red veil, forced to marry a 50-year-old man. The young master in silk who once taught me the ways of business would now have to call me mother. The distance between us wasn't just those 3 steps. It was a whole lifetime. On the wedding day, the hall was bustling with excitement. Under the veil, I could only vaguely see the hunched figure of Master Dominic. Cheers erupted as if this were a match ordained by heaven. I was led into the bridal chamber by the crowd. Red candles glowed brightly. I sat upright on the wedding bed. From beneath the veil, I saw a pair of embroidered shoes as a man stumbled toward me, smelling of wine. The ceremonial rod lifted the veil, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. His eyes were dull and sunken into sagging pouches, and his breath reeked of alcohol and decay. He rasped. I raised my head slightly, giving a graceful smile with a hint of shyness in my eyes. Husband. I did not call him master. Those words clearly made Dominic very satisfied. The wedding matron timely presented the ceremonial wine. After a cup, my face began to flush. Under the candlelight, I looked like a hibiscus, my eyes like almond blossoms. Dominic waved his hand and everyone left. His thin, withered hand touched the phoenix hairpin on my head. One by one, the ornaments were removed and dropped to the floor. He made a joke in his raspy voice as he unbuttoned my clothes. I heard my little bride is very good at business. I took the opportunity to grasp the back of his hand and guided him to remove the layers of my wedding dress. My knowledge is shallow compared to the brilliance of my husband. His throat made an excited sound. Excellent. I love the spirit in you the most. I bit my lip and smiled faintly as I let him press me down onto the silk bedding. As our skin touched, I smelled the scent of old medicine on him. Even the agarwood could not mask the smell of his fading life. That night, I gave my body to an old man who'd have been my grandfather. But so what? Even a fierce tiger is just a sick cat once its teeth fall out. A young husband might be hard to please, but an old man will die soon. I used my young body to bind Dominic within the bridal chamber. For 5 consecutive nights, Dominic stayed at Sai Villa. However, he had long since lost his strength. After the wedding night, the following nights were spent with him, simply holding me and talking about the past. I continued to act as though I enjoyed it, serving him comfortably. As expected, gold, silver, and jewels poured in like water. I didn't miss a thing. Every day I dressed up carefully, with jade hairpins filling my hair. An old man loves nothing more than vibrant colors. The more beautiful and radiant I looked, the more he might go. I didn't forget my goal. As the mistress, I had to take control. Dominic didn't have many children. The eldest son, Damien, was born to his first wife, and the second son, Dorian, was born to the concubine Lucia. Lucia was favored and had gradually taken control of the household after the first wife passed away. I heard the second son had been secretly fighting Damien lately. On the second day after the wedding, the concubines were supposed to pay their respects to the mistress, but by late afternoon, not even a maidservant had shown her face. While walking in the garden, I crossed paths with Lucia. She held her maid's arm, raised her chin, snorted coldly, and walked past me. Currently, Dominic only saw me as a toy for entertainment, and didn't mention this matter at all. I was happy to play the fool, spending my days drinking and singing with him, until a rumor suddenly spread through the streets saying the Dwan family had an old tree blooming. But the husband and wife were estranged and the father and son were unaware. In just 3 short days, the rumor spread throughout Lijo. The news reached Dominic, and he immediately left the merchant guild to return home. Seeing him enter in a rage, I pretended to be shocked. "Husband, what is wrong?" He slammed his hand on the table and summoned the butler. "Order the concubines to come and pay their respects tomorrow morning at any cost." I raised my teacup and gently stroked his chest. "The sisters are getting old and their health isn't good. It doesn't matter if they don't come." I pouted. "Only want to be with you, husband. I don't want to see any concubines or mistresses to avoid unnecessary jealousy." As expected, Dominic enjoyed this very much. "My little jealous one. Now that you are the mistress of the house, these etiquettes are necessary." I lightly tapped his chest with my red painted finger. "What kind of mistress? I only wish to be by your side. even if I have to die for it." He laughed loudly and hugged me tightly. "Silly girl. Everyone in the house is eyeing the management of the inner courtyard, yet you don't care at all." I leaned on his shoulder. "As long as I have my husband, those hollow titles don't matter." Currently, his two sons were fighting over the brand. Dominic was old, and what he loved most was someone pure who didn't crave power. My behavior fit his desires perfectly. That night, Matron Teresa was helping me remove my jewelry. "Mistress, your move was clever. You not only gathered information about the Dwan family's marriage negotiations with the prefect, but also forced the master to assert his authority himself." Dominic was a cunning fox who never cared much for appearances. But now that he had suddenly changed and stood up to support me, there had to be something suspicious. In a noble household with many servants, every gesture was watched. I intentionally let the rumors spread to test the waters. I wanted to see if the news of Damien marrying the prefect's daughter was true. Officials and noble families valued their reputation above all else. If rumors spread that the Dwan household favored a concubine and suppressed the wife, the marriage alliance would likely fail. "The mistress wants to meet the concubines tomorrow. Which outfit should you wear?" I casually chose the most vibrant, deep red silk dress. Naturally, the more ostentatious, the better. Teresa smiled faintly. "The more you stand out, the easier it will be for others to think the mistress is a simple-minded woman who doesn't understand the world." I gently stroked the phoenix hairpin in my hand. "Let them believe I am just a hollow, beautiful vase." In the bronze mirror, a woman with bright eyes and white teeth looked back, her gaze flowing with a hint of stubbornness. I looked exactly like a pampered, spoiled noble daughter. Who would have guessed the deep schemes hidden beneath that surface? In the flower hall, the scent of agarwood lingered. When Dominic entered and saw me sitting there in my magnificent attire, he froze for a moment. He laughed. "Seeing the mistress dressed like this, one might think you are about to enter the palace to meet the emperor." I pouted and caught the edge of my skirt to spin around. "I heard that the sisters in your courtyard are all beautiful. If I didn't dress up carefully, how could I hold my ground?" Dominic took my chin, his dry lips pressing against the corner of my mouth. "They are just two concubines. Is it worth being so tense over them?" "Oh, just two sisters." I widened my eyes and blushed, lowering my head. Then didn't I make a fool of myself?" Dominic waved his hand. "Not at all. My little bride's stunning appearance suits the dress perfectly." Just then, Lucia and Catherine walked in slowly. Seeing Dominic sitting in the seat of honor, the two were clearly flustered. "This humble one greets the master and the mistress," they said. I rushed forward to help them up. "Two sisters, please stand. Your bodies cannot handle such stress. These etiquettes should be waived if possible." My words were graceful, but every sentence carried a thorn. I saw Lucia's face change visibly, but she struggled to maintain a smile. A maid served tea. After Catherine finished her bow, I cheerfully took a hairpin from my hair. "This is a new style from the Yingxing district. I give it to you as a gift." When it was Lucia's turn, she intentionally made things difficult. A cup of tea spilled directly onto my red dress. Ignoring my clothes, I immediately rushed to help her. "Sister, are you burned?" I fretted. "You are getting older and your hands are slow. You need to take better care of yourself." Then I turned to Dominic and told him in a sweet voice, "Husband, do not blame her. It is common for old people to have shaking hands and blurred vision." I used Lucia's own excuses to silence her first, while intentionally showing a hint of jealousy in my words. Outsiders might not have understood, but Dominic certainly did. For years, Lucia was used to being pampered and hated it when someone dressed better than her. Today, she clearly wanted to provoke me into a rage. Those tactics might have seemed endearing to Dominic when she was younger, but now that she was older, he only saw her as someone who didn't know the rules. Moreover, this was a sensitive time due to the marriage negotiations with the prefect. Dominic's face darkened. "Since your spirit is not good, I will reduce your management rights over the inner courtyard and give them to Anna to handle. This way, you won't overexert yourself or lose face." I waved my hands hurriedly. "How can that be appropriate?" Dominic stood up, gave Lucia a cold look and declared, "The decision is final." He dropped his handkerchief and walked away. The next day I had the butler spread the word that from now on, the concubines only had to pay their respects once every 5 days. Waking up early every day would be too hard on their bodies, I remarked. Dominic tapped my nose and affectionately called me a little schemer. He believed that once the rules were established, outsiders would see the Dwan household as serious and disciplined. Dominic didn't care much about the women in the house paying respects. After he left, Teresa brought over the new account books I had taken over. I flipped through a few pages and set them aside. They were all petty expenses of little importance. Matters like purchasing food and clothing didn't pass through my hands yet. Teresa's eyes flickered with a hint of a smile. Is the mistress angry? What is the rush? I said. To catch a big fish, one must first let out a long line. For a few days, Dominic went out, reportedly to detain a distinguished guest from the capital. At night, with the moon shining like water, I set out wine and snacks in the small garden alone. I dismissed all the servants and took an old clay flute from my robe. The mournful sound of the flute echoed in the moonlight, like a cold wind through the heart. It was a song taught to me years ago, by Damien at Anquin Temple. I wondered why I chose this song. The sound of the flute suddenly faltered. I turned my head, my eyes blurry from the wine, and saw him standing under the moonlight. I didn't know how long he had been there. My emotions surged. Why are you here? I spoke out in grievance, stumbling as I stood up. Do you think you can control me? The flute slipped from my hand and fell to the ground. As I leaned forward and almost fell, he caught me with one hand. The familiar scent of bamboo hit me, and my whole body fell into his arms. This cold, fresh scent reminded me of a snowy night years ago. The snow at Mount Changling was heavy, and the mountains were sealed off. He was delirious with fever. Without medicine, I could only warm wine to keep us warm. His face had been flushed and his eyes unfocused when he suddenly knocked over the wine bottle. He held my neck and leaned down to kiss me. In our shared breath, I heard him rasp, "Marry me." Yet the next morning he had pretended it was only a dream. Now he held me tightly in his arms, his voice deep and raspy with suppressed emotion. Why are you playing that song? Does it mean you miss me? I struggled to get away. Respect yourself, young master. This is not Mount Changling. Before I could finish, he suddenly tightened his grip. I felt his chest heaving and his heart beating like a drum. Say you love me, he begged. I turned my face away, my voice raspy from the wine and choked with emotion. Why should I remember you when you didn't want me anymore? Damien suddenly grabbed my wrist with a force that caused me pain. How could I not love you? He hissed. Every ledger you calculate was taught by me. Even the calluses on your hands came from following me across the north and south. He whispered. Every part of you bears my mark. How can I not remember? Then he suddenly leaned down and bit my lip as if to punish me. I resisted, but he forcefully pried my teeth open, taking possession of me. I bit his tongue hard, filling my mouth with the taste of blood, but he didn't seem to feel it. Seeing you with that old man makes me go mad with jealousy. He growled against my lips. Thinking about you lying under him every night makes me want to kill him. I was held so tightly I could hardly breathe. My resistance slowly faded. Under the dim moonlight, the begonias in the garden witnessed a night of madness. He vented his frustration, leaving my body covered in blue and purple marks. He bit my earlobe and whispered hungrily, "You belong to me. Let's see what the old man does when he returns." At dawn, he vanished like a ghost without leaving a trace. My whole body ached so much I could hardly move. Looking at the cold, empty pillow beside me, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Men were truly heartless. A month later, I was diagnosed as pregnant. Dominic was so happy he couldn't close his mouth. He immediately ordered the ancestral hall to be opened so he could offer incense and thank his ancestors. I knew I still had vitality. He boasted, certain he would have a son. That day, he hurried back to Sai Villa. I deliberately wore a thin silk dress to greet him, using makeup to cover the marks that hadn't faded yet. On my smooth skin, begonias seemed to bloom, blending with the fragrance in the room. Dominic immediately lost control and spent the entire night with me. Under the candlelight, his thin, withered hand stroked my still, flat stomach. The fortune teller was right, he murmured. Your birth chart matches mine perfectly. You are the Dwan family's lucky star. At a family banquet, Dominic announced the good news with a flushed and joyful face. Catherine, who had no children, gave a forced smile. Lucia's hand trembled, and she dropped her chopsticks. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Damien. His fingers were white, and he almost crushed the wine cup in his hand. I pretended to be afraid and lightly pulled Dominic's sleeve. He immediately slammed the table and shouted at his son. Unfilial son, your mother is pregnant with your brother. Why don't you congratulate her? Damien stared at my stomach and hissed the words. Congratulations, mother. I smiled shyly and leaned into Dominic's arms. In an instant, I became the treasure of the Dwan household. Dominic cherished me like a jewel. I didn't let it go to my head and even handed over small management tasks of the inner courtyard to Catherine. The child in me was very good and barely caused me any trouble. Damien tried to meet me several times, but lately, there was no excuse. Dominic rarely left the villa, and Damien didn't dare to enter the inner courtyard casually. When I was 3 months pregnant, cinnabar powder was discovered in my food. I didn't react immediately, but sent April to invite a doctor to check my pulse in front of the servants. When I was 5 months pregnant, I went to the garden to digest my food after eating, and a stone bench suddenly broke in half. Fortunately, a maid used her body to catch me. After inspection, it was found that the joints of the stone bench had been secretly cut with a sharp tool. I strictly ordered everyone, do not speak a word of this. The old furniture was simply damaged. By the 7th month, the doctor confirmed that it would be a son. I hadn't wasted my time calculating and drinking those bitter herbal tonics every day. On the day of labor, I chose the exact moment Dominic was out to start having stomach pains. The first person to rush in was Lucia. In the middle of the night, she was heavily made up and covered in jewelry. I was in so much pain I could hardly breathe. I heard her lean down and whisper in my ear, "Push harder. If the child isn't born, the play cannot continue." This time, the labor lasted an entire day and night. Dominic hurried back to the villa, and upon hearing that I had given birth to a son, he immediately ordered the granaries to be opened for charity. The midwife held the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. I have never seen such a healthy premature baby. Look at this flushed face. He looks just like a full-term infant. Lucia stepped forward and playfully poked the baby's cheek. "Oh my," she remarked. The master must have taken some divine medicine during his trip. It not only caused the mistress to become pregnant, but also resulted in such a healthy child. Her words sounded like praise, but every sentence dug deep into Dominic's suspicion. His face gradually darkened. He suddenly remembered that he had been away from the villa for 20 days during that time. Dominic looked at the child's face and found it increasingly unfamiliar. He suddenly raised his head. "Butler, call Dr. Wang." The doctor had been waiting in the side room. He walked in, took the child, observed him carefully, and felt the baby's limbs. After a long silence, he spoke. "The young master's physical condition is indeed strong. If I didn't know he was premature, I would have thought he was full-term." Lucia immediately followed up, her voice full of surprise. "It is rare for a child born 10 days early to be so strong. It must be a blessing from heaven." It was clearly flattery, but Dominic's face had turned green. A moment later, he coldly ordered, "Close the villa gates. All unnecessary people, leave. Take the baby to the side room." "Where are you taking the child?" I leaned on April's arm and stumbled out of the delivery room, my face as white as paper. Having just given birth, I was still bleeding, and every step felt like a knife cut. "Husband, the baby is small and cannot handle the cold wind." I reached out to take the swaddle from the wet nurse. Dominic's face was grim, his wrinkled features showing clear suspicion. Lucia fanned herself with a round fan. "Since the doctors said the child is healthy and doesn't look premature, there is no need for the mistress to be so anxious." She gave Dominic a meaningful look. "Unless there is something hidden that cannot be said." I immediately turned to Dominic, my eyes full of disbelief. "Husband, do you suspect me?" He avoided my gaze. "Right or wrong will be clear for a test." I stumbled forward and grabbed his sleeve. "Think about the humiliation the child will face if this news spreads. How will he stand in the household?" My voice choked, and I could hardly speak. "Think carefully. Have I ever overstepped my bounds while serving you this past year?" Tears rolled down my cheeks. I raised my head to look at him, making sure every tear fell where he could see it. "Were the ginseng soups I cooked and the nights I spent waiting for you all lies? If you truly suspect me, you should use a white silk cord to strangle us both right now rather than let the child live in shame." Seeing a flicker of hesitation in Dominic's eyes, Lucia suddenly spoke up loudly. "Why is the mistress so agitated? Is it because you have a guilty conscience?" "Shut up!" I struggled to stand straight, my skirt stained with a patch of deep red. Dominic slammed the table. "Bring me the water." 2 maidservants immediately held me tightly, preventing me from moving forward. Dominic thought for a moment, his old, dull eyes looking back and forth between me and the child. "What Lucia said isn't without reason. A test will reveal the truth." My whole body trembled as more tears fell. "Stop this madness. If there is truly nothing wrong, the rumors will naturally vanish." I knew this move couldn't be avoided, so I lowered my voice in a plea. "I am upright and not afraid of the test." I pouted slightly, But if I am innocent, my husband must compensate me. The atmosphere in the side room was heavy. Dominic sat in the seat of honor, his hands rolling 2 jade walnuts that made a clicking sound. The child in the swaddles seemed to sense something and wouldn't stop crying in the wet nurse's arms. A porcelain bowl filled with clear water was prepared. Dominic stepped forward and pricked his finger with a needle, letting a drop of blood fall onto the water. I took the child. Looking at his flushed face, my heart felt like it was being twisted. Sensing his mother's warmth, the baby slowly stopped crying. I gently took his small hand and held it in my palm. The silver needle pricked him quickly and decisively. A heart-wrenching cry echoed as a drop of blood fell into the bowl. The room fell silent as all eyes were fixed on the water. Only Lucia didn't step forward, leisurely wiping her lips as if she were certain of victory. "Mistress, there is no need to keep resisting," she sneered. "It is better to confess early." Before she could finish, the butler's excited voice rang out. "It merged. The blood has merged." I burst into tears and held the sobbing child tightly, my voice breaking. "Husband, do you believe me now?" The wrinkles on Dominic's face smoothed out, and a look of wild joy filled his expression. "Quickly, take the young master down and care for him carefully." Then he turned to the butler. "Open the warehouse. Give the mistress all the newly imported blood bird's nest to nourish her body." I leaned on Dominic's shoulder and lightly tapped his chest. "I risked my life to give you a son, yet you still suspected me. I want the jade bracelet from the Yingxing district and the ruby jewelry set from the butterfly pavilion. Or else, I will ignore you." Dominic laughed loudly and patted my back. "Buy it. I will buy everything." I glanced at Lucia, whose face was gray. She had been so sharp-tongued earlier, but now she almost dropped her teacup. She had thought herself clever, but she had been too arrogant before the battle was over. I didn't kick her while she was down. I didn't even bother with her. I let Dominic hold me as we got into a soft sedan. The pain below me surged again. I knew that struggle had caused my wound to tear. It took 3 months of quiet recovery for me to gradually regain my strength. Matron Teresa brought in a bowl of medicine, her eyes full of pity. "Mistress, why did you have to take such a risk? It could have been 2 lives lost if something had gone wrong." I placed my hand on the back of hers, took the bowl, and drank it all in one gulp. The bitter taste quickly spread through my throat, yet I smacked my lips, sensing a hint of sweetness. "Do not worry, matron," I said. "Wealth has to be fought for. Once I decided to fight, I wouldn't regret the outcome." I already knew Damien often sneaked into the inner yard to secretly watch Dominic and me together. Years ago, when I was out with him, I had dressed as a young male servant and never showed him a hint of weakness. In his eyes, I was only strong and unyielding. Now he saw me speaking softly and leaning into Dominic's arms, acting like a graceful and flirtatious kitten begging for food. His eyes burned with jealousy as if he wanted to incinerate everything. Men were truly ridiculous. The more they couldn't have something, the more they obsessed over it. Damien had always been arrogant and believed I would eventually be his. He never imagined the young companion, who once followed him to learn business, would now become an unreachable light. That distance was enough to make him lose his mind, and that was exactly what I calculated. On the 10th day after Dominic left the villa, I intentionally dismissed all the servants and sat in the garden alone drinking wine. After finishing a jar, I took out the clay flute I had kept for years. The melody of the Song of Longing echoed in the twilight. I knew that arrogant fish would eventually swim into my net. As for Lucia, she hadn't made a move during the first 3 months when my pregnancy was unstable. That had troubled me for a long time. If the child were born safely, he would be a legitimate son. When Dominic passed away, having 2 legitimate sons would leave no room for Dorian, Lucia's son, to inherit. After discussing it with Teresa many times, I came to a terrifying conclusion. Lucia must have known something and was waiting for the day of the birth to use the blood test to kill me. If that were the case, I would be doomed as soon as the child was born. Therefore, I had planned everything carefully. First, I had April discover the cinnabar powder in my tonics, then I had someone, accidentally, find that the stone bench had been sawed. Every murder attempt had witnesses, but I deliberately suppressed them and didn't make a scene. It was all thanks to a secret palace trick Teresa had revealed. During a blood test, if alum was added to the water, anyone's blood would merge. Alum was commonly used in spice making, and since I often made my own fragrances, it was always available in my room. Teresa and I had tested it many times, confirming that both human and dog blood could merge. To be sure, 3 days before the birth, I had someone put alum into the well at Shy Villa. It happened to be raining then, and the well water tasted slightly sour. The servants thought it was just rainwater, and didn't suspect a thing. Lucia thought she had a guaranteed victory and worked with the midwife to cast doubt on me. A few words were enough to spark Dominic's suspicion. Little did she know I had already pulled the rug out from under her and set a trap, waiting for her to fall in. Once it was over, I didn't need to say anything harsh. Dominic naturally stood up for me. The matter of hairs was a major issue, and I was certain that if something like this happened, Dominic wouldn't let it go. Thus, the previous incidents, like the cinnabar powder and the sabotaged bench, would reach his ears. On the day of Kay's 100-day celebration, Dominic personally handed the management medallion to me in front of the clan elders. As for Lucia, who once controlled the inner courtyard, she hadn't been seen for 3 months. Dominic said she was ill, so she had no choice but to be ill. Even her son Dorian was severely reprimanded and stripped of his management rights over 3 major shops. In a hidden corner, I felt a burning gaze following me intensely, as if trying to see through my mask. I raised my head to meet Damien's eyes and saw him dazed as he walked closer. Kay was wrapped in red swaddling, his skin flushed and white, looking so adorable it made Damien freeze. His Adam's apple bobbed as he asked in a raspy voice, Can I hold the baby?" I smiled and gracefully refused. The young master is not married yet and isn't used to caring for children. It wouldn't be good if you dropped or hurt him. I held Kay tighter and stood with Dominic in the middle of the hall, receiving every word of praise and flattery without looking at Damien again. With Kay, a legitimate son, my position in the Dwan family was as solid as a rock. During the day, I had to manage the inner courtyard and care for the baby. I had no energy to continue serving Dominic. But I had already planned for that. As night fell, a small, unremarkable sedan was brought in through the side gate. When the curtain was lifted, Dominic was stunned. Out stepped an exotic dancer with blonde hair and blue eyes, her skin as white as porcelain. A single glance from her carried 10,000 charms. I lightly nudged his elbow and pouted. "Husband, you are staring so much you will forget about me and our son." He snapped out of it and immediately hugged me tightly. His breath smelled of wine and decay, yet I could still lean into his arms gracefully without changing my expression. "She is just a toy," he slurred. "She cannot compare to my little bride." I pretended to be aggrieved. I had to use an old acquaintance to find her. The deposit alone cost 1,000 silver taels. I looked at him with wide eyes. And to buy her freedom, that cost another 2,000. I held up 3 fingers. The total was 3,000 taels. Dominic laughed and pulled a stack of banknotes from his robe. "I will compensate you with 5,000. I beamed as I received the money and gave his wrinkled face a loud kiss. "Husband, you are the best." Such a blatant display of seeking favor made Dominic trust me even more, and he often praised my simple nature. Whenever he said that, I would pretend to be embarrassed and lean on his shoulder. "I only rely on you, husband. Nothing else matters as long as you love me." When Kay started babbling, news arrived from Jingzhou that the Liu family brand was on the verge of collapse. In just 3 years, the once glorious Liu shop had reached its end. For those 3 years, Tobias had been sending secret reports every month. Despite the hidden support from the Dwan family, the Liu family business continued to decline. Over the past year, my father had sent letters constantly. Initially, they were inquiries, but they gradually turned into pleas. Every stroke of the pen revealed the difficulties of the business world. He hoped I would think of our family ties and help. The Liu family foundation was built by me alone. He had become the head merchant without any effort and thought business was easy. He had neglected management and let useless, lazy people handle the operations. Counterfeit goods were everywhere, and the accounts were a mess. Long-time customers had left, and major business partners had terminated their contracts. The once bright Liu name was now nothing but a shadow. I picked up my pen and sighed, my eyes seeing the scene of him patting my shoulder years ago and saying a daughter would eventually marry out. The ink fell on the paper like a sharp blade. I wrote, "I am now someone else's wife. My duty is to teach my son and serve my husband. I am powerless to help with matters outside the inner courtyard." It wasn't until Harrison incurred a massive debt he couldn't pay that my father, already troubled by the financial deficit, refused to pay it. He intended to ignore it for a few days to let his son learn a hard lesson. However, since Harrison couldn't pay, he took Vivian's jewelry to pawn it all. The gamblers saw this and beat him. They hadn't intended to kill him, but Harrison was used to a pampered life and his body was weak. He died after a few blows. My father was so shocked he suffered a stroke and was bedridden, his mouth twisted and unable to speak. The irony was that because Harrison had committed so many bad deeds, the neighbors testified together against him. The officials simply ruled that the debt was cleared with his death, and the thugs only had to pay a fine and receive 20 lashes. Harrison was a gambler and a drunkard who had long been hated to the bone. When the news reached me, I sobbed beside Dominic. Husband, the Liu family was already small, and now only one branch remains. If father passes away, I will be all alone. I didn't miss the thoughtful look in his eyes. A moment later, he held my hand and spoke with warmth. Do not worry. I will prepare a carriage to take you back to Jingzhou to visit. After 3 years, I stepped through the main gates of the Liu estate once more. The vibrant red paint of the past had peeled away, leaving the entrance gray and dilapidated. Inside the room, the bitter smell of medicine hit my nose. My father lay bedridden. As I entered, his clouded eyes brightened for a moment. Ignoring the saliva trickling from his mouth, he opened it wide, making several struggling, choked sounds. I stepped closer and leaned over the bed. Father. That single word seemed to transport us back to the past. In those days, he carried his wares through every street while I tugged at his hem, wading together through the blue, stone-paved alleys. On his shoulders, the bamboo baskets filled with spices shimmered under the golden sunlight. Occasionally, he would pull a sweet cake from his robe and break off the larger piece for me. He taught me how to harvest medicinal herbs and create fragrances. The two of us would hide in an abandoned brick kiln, researching the ideal thickness to weave the best bamboo pillows. The father-daughter bond of the past felt like a story from a previous life. I leaned close to his ear. I still remember the first spice you ever taught me. I whispered. You said that for agarwood, one must choose a piece with fine, small grains and tap it lightly against the ear. If it makes a clear sound, it is of the highest quality. I paused, my voice trembling slightly. But father, you taught me so much yet never gave me a single chance to prove myself. I was the one who suffered alongside you, yet someone else was meant to enjoy the fortune. How could this world be so unfair? I looked down at him. Look at yourself now, lying here like this. Has Vivian, the woman you cherished like the apple of your eye, stayed by your side for even a single step? Tears welled up uncontrollably, hatred and love tore at my heart simultaneously, making it hard to breathe. During those years, I disguised myself as a man to follow Damien north and south to learn the trade. Every coin I earned was secretly sent back to the Liu family. I wore men's clothing for years, not even daring to use rouge. Yet on the day I returned and pushed open the doors of the new Liu residence, I saw a happy family before my eyes. You, Vivian, and her son. Vivian was like a bird you kept in a golden cage. The money I spent years painstakingly earning was used by you to secretly support their mother and son. In the end, I was merely the one weaving a wedding dress for someone else. As the Liu family grew more prosperous, my value was gradually erased. My father began to drop hints. He said a daughter must marry sooner or later, and that 18 was already considered being an old maid. How ridiculous. When he needed me, I was the pillar supporting the entire business. When he didn't, I became a commodity waiting to be sold. I could identify every spice with my eyes closed and knew how to split bamboo strips with perfect uniformity. The bookkeeping method I devised doubled efficiency, and my speed at mental calculation made even the old scholars admire me. Yet, simply because I was born female, those skills were deemed useless. Oh, father! I sighed, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. You always said one must have clear eyes and a clear heart in business. So how could you not see that Vivian had betrayed you so blatantly? I leaned closer, delivering the final blow. You lived frugally for so many years, only to end up raising a son for the old pharmacy manager. My father's eyes bulged, and his throat made a rattling sound. Do not be agitated. I whispered softly. I will find the best doctors to treat you because I am not like the ungrateful crowd you kept. I stood up, not bothering with his broken cries behind me. Keep your eyes open and watch, father. I am going to turn this dead end into a winning move. During the 3 days I stayed at the Liu estate, I didn't have a single night of peaceful sleep. That night, the west wind blew cold and loud. I got up to close the window but was suddenly stopped by a strong hand. Why are you here? I asked, startled. Before I could finish, Damien leaped into the room. His eyes lingered on my swollen, red eyelids and his brow furrowed. I wasn't at peace. I turned away, suppressing the emotions surging within me, my voice breaking. "Young master, it is late, you should leave." The room fell silent for a long time. When I turned back, I didn't know he had been standing behind me. His warm hand touched my shoulder, but I jerked away. "Stay back," I hissed. "Did you come to mock me?" During our struggle, the necklace holding the old coin around my neck snapped. Cling! The sound of metal hitting the stone floor rang clearly in the silent night. Damien leaned down to pick it up. Looking at the coin that had been polished smooth from being touched, his voice grew hoarse. "You still keep the coin I gave you all those years ago. Do not lie to me about your feelings." I snatched it back. "It is just a coincidence." Before I could finish, he pulled me forcefully into his arms with a strength that startled me. If it wasn't precious, why would a woman like the mistress of the Dwan family carry a worthless old coin? His hot breath brushed against my ear, his voice strong and filled with an irresistible desperation. "He sees you only as a toy, but I truly love you." That single confession broke all my defenses. "You scoundrel!" I cried, hitting his chest. "If you had married me back then, Kay could have rightfully called you father." His whole body trembled, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. The suspicions about Kay's parentage were finally confirmed. He lifted my face with trembling hands. "It isn't too late," he swore. "I was a fool for years, buried in business rotes and missing the most precious treasure of my life. Every time I see you smiling beside that old man, I want to tear him apart. I regret it to my bones." He claimed, if I had proposed immediately at Mount Changling, things wouldn't have ended like this. I shook my head, grief blocking my throat. What use are those words now? The Liu family has withered. My son and I are like fish on a chopping block in the Dwan household. "No, it won't be like that," he insisted, raising his voice then quickly lowering it. "Endure a little longer. Kay is my flesh and blood. I won't let you suffer at all. Wait until I seize the position of the head of the Dwan family. I will give you a stable life." I looked at him with tearful eyes. "What about the prefect's daughter?" He hesitated for a moment, then his gaze turned determined. "She is worth nothing compared to you." Under the candlelight, he kissed the tears from my cheeks. Every kiss was passionate and quiet. We held each other for a long time. I heard his breath grow shallow and his hands began to wander. I held his hand. "Don't," I whispered. "My father is still ill." Seeing that I truly didn't want to, he reluctantly withdrew. Before leaving, he placed the coin back in my palm and held my hands tenderly. "Wait for me, Anna." I stroked the coin in my hand and watched his figure vanish into the night. Wait for him. Those words coming from his mouth were pure irony. This man claimed to love me. Yet what about the courtesan at Drunken Moon Brothel, or the beautiful mistress in the South City Villa? Years ago at Mount Changling, after he got what he wanted, he had also played the role of a devoted lover. Currently, it was only because he hadn't possessed me again that his desire was so strong. He could hide those fleeting feelings, but how could he hide the fire I had ignited? If the prefect's daughter heard of those things, how could she still marry into the Dwan family? He was nearly 30, and already had several illegitimate children. Yet he still dreamed of marrying a noble lady and taking over the Dwan family assets. I kept that coin only because I knew it would be useful. Carrying it because of love, that was just a lie. I simply had Matron Teresa touch it every other day, and kept it in the incense burner in my room. That was enough to make it carry my scent, making him think I longed for him day and night. I used my private savings to settle all the outstanding debts for the goods. After 3 years, I stepped into the Liu brand shops once again, but the prosperity of the past was gone. Fabrics were thrown haphazardly in corners, and the dye in the vats smelled of rot. The drying yard that was once flat and clean was now overgrown with weeds. Standing before that ruin, a surge of pain washed over me. "Oh, Father, if you had chosen to trust me back then, the Liu family wouldn't have fallen to this state." I closed my eyes, pushing the swirling emotions down. When I opened them, my mind was clear. Together with Tobias and Silas, I went to each house to settle wages. "Whoever is willing to follow me will be promoted once the brand recovers," I announced clearly. "I will not stop anyone who wants to find another path." When I returned to the Dwan villa, it was the 9th day. I leaned into Dominic's arms and sobbed, my pale clothes highlighting my pitiful appearance. "Husband, father is gravely ill," I wept. "I am just a woman of the inner courtyard. I lack the strength to manage a business. It is better to hand over the secret fragrance formulas and bamboo weaving techniques to the Dwan family to ensure they flourish." A spark appeared in Dominic's dull eyes. I knew he was tempted. The Liu family's fragrance and bamboo crafts were the only businesses in Lizhou that could earn massive profits. He thought for a moment and coughed twice. Those are Liu family assets. Since you are all your father has left, it is only right for you to inherit them. I raised my head, revealing just enough vulnerability. But I am just a woman. Would it not be improper for me to show my face in public? He waved it off, a hint of calculation appearing at the corners of his mouth. You can be the figurehead. I will appoint someone to assist you. I lowered my eyes and nodded. Thank you, husband. This old man wanted to swallow my family's business while maintaining his reputation, using me as a puppet to hide his greed. As long as I had the legal right to enter the shops, what did it matter if there were supervisors? I officially took over the Liu brand, and for every matter, I consulted the 2 managers Dominic had appointed. In the business world, I played the role of a perfect, foolish woman, while behind the scenes, I gave those 2 managers a generous share of the profits. These 2 men had limited ability and had never been treated so importantly. They immediately changed their allegiance and turned to me. Every report they gave Dominic was filled with praise for me. In less than 6 months, the Liu brand was revived. I credited the 2 managers for everything, praising them to the skies. As for the real secret formulas, I naturally didn't breathe a word. What I taught them were merely second-rate formulas I had created. By this time, Dominic had no interest in managing business. He spent all day indulging in pleasure with the exotic dancer. To show off, he even invited his shady friends to his room to watch the dancer perform naked. He was currently weak but still believed Dorian was a filial son. Little did he know that the dear blood wine he drank, and the tonics he used were actually the orders to send him to the afterlife. I enjoyed watching from the sidelines. Since the father didn't love the son and the son didn't respect the father, it was even better, I didn't have to lift a finger. I stood by the sickbed, watching my father's face grow more haggard by the day. I leaned over to tuck the blanket around him. How do you think your daughter is managing the business? I asked softly. I just opened 2 more shops last month. He made a few raspy sounds, but what he wanted to say was no longer important. I pulled out a handkerchief and gently wiped the saliva from his mouth. The officials have sentenced Vivian and the pharmacy manager to exile for 3,000 miles. I whispered. Do you think that is divine retribution? My father suddenly coughed violently, a layer of tears welling in his eyes. I remained unmoved and even patiently smoothed his messy white hair. Rest in peace, father. I will visit often. I stood up and straightened my skirt, looking down at him with a smile. After all, the 2 of us still have many things to talk about. As I walked out, I heard a choked sob behind me. It sounded like the helpless whimpering he made years ago when he took me to sell goods and we were bullied by thugs. Only this time, there was no one left by his side to wipe away those tears. Recently, Dominic's health had declined rapidly. His face, which used to be flushed from the pills, had turned a sickly white. His dull eyes bulged out, always carrying a terrifying gloom when he looked at people. He treated the servants poorly, beating or scolding them. Only when he saw Kay did he show a bit of kindness, even sighing. My unfilial sons all want me dead, he lamented. I can only find peace with my youngest son. I stood behind him, my fingers scented with a special calming fragrance, gently massaging his temples. He took a deep breath, and his tense face slowly relaxed. The children are grown and have their own thoughts, I remarked gently. Dominic suddenly opened his eyes and snorted. I am not dead yet, and they are already fighting for power. He especially complained about Damien. Why isn't he married at his age? It is disgraceful. I quickly changed the subject. By the way, Master sent the 2nd son to Lingzhou. At the mention of Dorian, his expression softened slightly. Dorian has been sensible since childhood. I feel at peace giving him the Lingzhou business. My heart skipped a beat. He glanced at me. Why are you silent? I regained my composure and replied softly. Lingzhou has beautiful scenery. It is good for the 2nd son to go on a trip. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and his withered hand grabbed my chin. Does my little bride think I am old? His eyes were filled with suspicion and worriness. I wasn't afraid and playfully hit his chest. Even an old lion is still the king of the forest. Those immature boys cannot compare. I love your experienced aura the most. Satisfied, he let go, asked about Kay's studies, and then tottered off to the exotic dancer's room. I stood still, calculating in my heart. Lucia had always cherished Dorian like a treasure and never let him leave Lizhou. The fact that she agreed to let him go to Lingzhou showed how much Damien had pressured them. With the assets in Lingzhou stabilized, they feared Damien would overtake them if they didn't expand. I suspected the Lingzhou trip was a trap Damien had set. Very good. It wasn't in vain that I used Kay's parentage to stoke the fire. News of Dorian's death arrived more than a month later. The manager who accompanied him said with a trembling voice, "The second son contracted a toxic miasma upon arriving and refused to rest." Lucia, acting as if she had gone mad, rushed over and kicked the manager. "What else? Speak the truth." The manager collapsed and didn't dare look up. The young master, he spent his days with courtesans and drinking dear blood wine. The next day, the courtesan woke up to find the young master had stopped breathing. "My son." Lucia wailed in agony, her heart shattered. Dominic's eyes bulged, and his throat made a rattling sound. Before he could speak, he collapsed onto the mahogany chair. The flower hall immediately fell into chaos, with the sounds of crying and shouting for help echoing everywhere. Only I remained calm. "Take the master down. Call the doctor immediately." As I walked out of the hall, I saw Damien standing to one side silent. When I turned my head, my gaze met his look, which was as sharp as a blade. At this moment, the light in his eyes was no longer hidden, it was filled with murderous intent and ambition. He and I were the same kind of people, both losing our mothers early and struggling to survive in the shadows, both craving a love we were never meant to have. It was a pity the world could not contain two people as ruthless as us. The pain of losing his son caused Dominic to collapse completely. The great merchant who once dominated Lingzhou was now bedridden, relying on ginseng to prolong his life. I stepped up to manage Dorian's funeral. For the first time, I stood forward to let the entire household see the capability of the mistress. Meanwhile, Damien took over all of Dorian's assets, his influence reaching its peak. In the quiet of the night, I went to Suixiang Villa and pushed open the door. Lucia was sitting dazed on the bed, her dark hair having turned white in just a month. The woman once most favored in the inner courtyard was now skin and bones as if her soul had been drained. "Do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy and devoid of its former sharpness. I set down my cloak and slowly sat in a chair. "Naturally, I came to find you for a reason." She looked at me warily. "You have seen enough of the mockery. You can leave." I ignored her tone and said indifferently, "I heard that when the second son arrived in Lingzhou, the air was filled with willow catkins. It was a windy night, and he had been drinking when the managers took him to the brothel." I paused, looking at her. "Isn't it strange that he chose that specific night to go out?" Lucia froze, and her eyes began to show panic. "What do you mean by catkins?" I acted surprised. "Oh, you didn't know. Lingzhou has trees called white poplars, which release white catkins that fill the air during that season." Lucia fell into a daze as if contemplating something. I ignored her and spoke gently. "Sister, you must maintain your strength for your grandson's sake. If you fall, it will only benefit others." Having said that, I stopped, smiled, and left. As expected, a few days later, Lucia mobilized all her hidden influences to investigate the cause of Dorian's death. To the outside world, Dorian had died of miasma and exhaustion, but Lucia knew better than anyone. Dorian had suffered from mild asthma since childhood, and had hidden it from Dominic for years by secretly taking medicine. The tonics and soups he took daily were actually asthma treatments. Like his father, he was a regular at brothels. Damien had capitalized on this to set a perfect trap. He bribed the accompanying manager to choose a time when willow catkins were thick in Lingzhou, and had Dorian get drunk before taking him to the brothel. The courtesan intentionally opened the windows wide to let the catkins and miasma enter his lungs, killing him slowly during his revelry. As for me, I only had to provide a few clues when Lucia was investigating. That was enough for a grieving mother to piece together the truth herself. When Damien arrived, I had just lulled Kay to sleep. Under the candlelight, he reached out to gently stroke Kay's cheek, a rare hint of tenderness flashing in his eyes. "Once the old man dies, Kay can rightfully call me father," he whispered. He sat for a long time before pulling a wax paper pack from his robe, his voice trembling slightly. "Anna, I need a favor." He looked at me intensely. "I have to go to Lingzhou in 3 days to settle the funeral. I hope to hear news of my father's death when I returned." I didn't take the packet but frowned. "Dominic is your father." He laughed coldly and grabbed my shoulder so hard I gasped. "Father, I am the legitimate eldest son, yet I always had to yield to Dorian. Is there any such thing as such a biased father?" Dorian was given the easy path to inherit in Jingzhou, while I had to travel everywhere to carve out my own way. Why should I care? He shoved the packet into my hand and his voice suddenly softened. "Give it to him. Wait for me to seize power. I promise you will be my primary wife, just as I promised on Mount Changling. He held me tightly, his strength suggesting he wanted to merge me into his very bones. I irritably snatched the jade pendant from his waist. I will keep this as a pledge, I said with reddened eyes. If you dare betray me, I will take Kay and vanish. That rare show of vulnerability pleased him. He laughed and lifted my chin. When did my Anna learn to act so spoiled? He lingered by my ear for a while before leaving, not forgetting to remind me. Remember. Give him the powder. I looked down at the poison, smiling coldly at his cunning. He wanted to use my hand to kill the final obstacle, while he returned as they clean up the mess and take all the glory. It was a pity he still underestimated me. Had I spent years planning just to be given a status by a man? Men thought themselves the masters of the world and believed women only wanted a status. What use was a rotten status? In the end, one still had to live by someone else's whim. What I wanted was for the entire massive estate to fall into my hands. Dominic woke up to find me with red-rimmed eyes. I hadn't left his side for days and had never shed a tear before him, but now I cried like a lost child, immediately making him suspicious. What is wrong? He asked. I wiped my tears and struggled to speak. Dominic's gaze turned fierce, and his skeletal hand gripped my wrist tightly. Speak. I tremblingly pulled the packet of medicine from my robe. Someone is forcing me to harm you. They threatened Kay if I didn't comply. I sobbed. I don't mind dying, but I cannot live if Kay falls into evil hands. Dominic turned purple with rage and seemed to want to crush my wrist. Ooh, who is it? I cried and pulled out the jade pendant, letting my tears fall without saying another word. That beast. That unfilial beast. He roared and spat out a mouthful of blood. If I had known, I would have drowned him at birth. Why wasn't it him who died? If it were Dorian, it would never have come to this. I buried my head in his lap and sobbed while laughing inwardly. What hypocrisy. The dear wine and tonics he had been taking for years were all provided by Dorian. It was his blatant favorism that pushed Damien to the edge. After a long time, he regained his composure and slowly removed the jade ring he always wore. Take Kay to the clan leader's residence. With this ring, no one will dare touch him. As for me, he looked at me with dull eyes and a hint of calculation. I am not at peace leaving you behind. It is best if you join me and the dancer in the grave to pay respects to the ancestors. I didn't hesitate to throw myself into his arms, embracing that rotting corpse. Without you, husband, my life has no meaning. Those words pleased him. He stroked my hair and laughed. Go, do as you please for the next few days. Do not say I didn't love you. I tucked him in, lulled him to sleep, and slowly closed the door. The board was set. Lucia, I thought, don't disappoint me this time. Damien hadn't been gone 3 days when he was carried back. On a rainy spring night, he was in a hurry. His carriage suddenly malfunctioned, and the horses panicked. The driver saw the danger and fled, leaving Damien to fall into a ravine. Fortunately, a family resting in a nearby hut saved his life. It was a pity that treatment was delayed, and he lost all feeling in his legs. News arrived just as Dominic was taking his medicine. Upon hearing that his eldest son was paralyzed, he spat out blood and died instantly. The entire villa fell into chaos. Having just finished Dorian's funeral, they now had to prepare for the masters. This was no longer difficult for me. I handled it even more thoroughly than before. I held Kay and stood before the funeral hall, the ring symbolizing my position as the head of the household shining clearly on my thumb. A few elders in the clan looked suspicious, but even the clan leader stood respectfully, so they didn't dare say a word. That old man had wanted to drag me down with him. I only had to show the ring and offer a few explanations and some benefits, and those people were happy to testify for me. I entered Suixiang Villa again. Lucia was sewing clothes for her grandson. Seeing me, she set down her needle. What do you want? She asked avidly. I smiled and sat down. Naturally, I came to thank you, sister. We both understood the tactic of killing with a borrowed blade. I lost and you won, she said bitterly. But I only lost because I ran out of time. I nodded in understanding, knowing that if she hadn't been worried about her grandson, she might have truly fought to the end. I had to admit her tactics within the inner courtyard were extraordinary. Years ago, during the blood test, she had known the child wasn't Dominic's. I suspected that Dominic's inability to have children was largely her doing, but she couldn't say it. If she had spoken, she would have dragged me down but also destroyed herself, so she had to swallow the injustice. I didn't come to mock you, I said. Instead, I need your help. She looked at me with suspicion. What are you planning? I remained calm and composed. Sister, you managed the inner courtyard for decades, and your tactics are far superior to mine. So, I ask you to continue managing it for me. I explained, the business is now overwhelmingly busy, and I have no time for household matters. I added, I heard your grandson likes to read. I have specially requested a place for him as a student under scholar Yishen. Lucia's gaze wavered. Her son was gone, and her grandson was all she had left. Why are you helping me? Knowing she was still wary, I spoke bluntly. The conflict of interest between us is gone. Why should we fight to the death? Catherine is sensible, and I have never made things difficult for her. Once Lucia returned to manage the inner courtyard, I could finally focus entirely on developing the business. When Damien regained consciousness, I already held 80% of the business. After learning he would never walk again, he went into a rage at the villa, screaming to report it to the officials. The carriage was sabotaged, the driver was a stranger. Someone wants me dead. He smashed everything in his room for days. The servants were miserable and begged me to see him. Lucia had intended to be ruthless, and if I hadn't secretly sent people to follow him, he would have died long ago. I considered it a return for those few steps he took toward me at the docks years ago. I pushed open the door and a bowl of medicine flew at me. I stepped aside. The once handsome and charming young master was now haggard and sunken-cheeked, sitting on a wheelchair. Go to the magistrate, he begged. Report the case. I want the person who hurt me to pay in blood. I said nothing, only watching him. A moment later, his shouting turned to sobbing. Do you also look down on me, Anna? Where is Kay? I want my son to acknowledge his ancestry. I slowly knelt before him. Damien. I looked him in the eye. Did you ever consider that if I had been caught with the poison you gave me, I would have died a gruesome death? Damien froze and turned away. I would have protected you. Truly? I asked. Like you protected me at Mount Changling by taking advantage of me and then regretting it, or like forcing me to poison my husband only to be buried with him. Damien's eyes tightened. I realized he had known Dominic intended for me to be buried with him, yet since the old man wouldn't die, he had dared to force me to speed it along. From beginning to end, I was just a disposable pawn. I stood up and straightened my sleeves. Secure the young master's wheelchair. Do not let him hurt himself. I looked down and smiled. Do not smash things anymore, Damien. If you anger the servants, no one will be left to clean you or change your clothes. Damien stared at me and burst into loud laughter. It was you. I underestimated you. You are the one behind it all. You venomous woman. I will report you. I turned away, not wanting to waste another word. In this world, when men fought for power, it was called brilliance. When women schemed, it was called a snake's heart. Ridiculous. If one has ambition, why distinguish between male and female? Hearing the screams in the room, I felt a slight regret. I thought perhaps I should have let him join his father, rather than let him cause trouble in the villa. I had him moved to the side wing and found several deaf, mute servants who couldn't read to look after him. I made sure he was well, cared for so that anyone who looked would praise my virtue. As Kay grew, I took him with me after his lessons to teach him the ways of business. After settling my father's funeral, I gradually moved the Lu brand back to Jingzhou, so I no longer had to travel between two places. Within the brand, some managers had hidden ambitions and initially looked down on their new mistress. I wasn't in a hurry and didn't get angry, I simply had notices posted everywhere. I announced that workers traveling between provinces would receive 2 silver taels as a travel allowance. Families with parents over 60 would receive extra grain at the end of the year. Anyone with 3 or more children would receive silver every quarter for their upbringing. I also pushed for the establishment of charcoal stations at every branch. We gave out silver charcoal in winter and refreshing drinks in summer. I even set a rule that every month on the 1st, the women of the households would receive red sugar to nourish their health. For every bolt of cloth sold, the manager would receive a portion of the profit. Those benefits hit them exactly where it mattered. Some stubborn old-timers tried to act out, but they were secretly pushed aside by their own subordinates. I used profit to build alliances and kindness and nurture loyalty. Gradually, the way the managers looked at me changed from contempt to respect. I knew it wasn't true respect but rather greed for money. In this life, 9 out of 10 things can be solved with money. It isn't surprising. 2 years later, my reputation for kindness had spread through every branch. At 32, I stood on the highest floor of the brand's headquarters, looking down at the rows of warehouses. The autumn wind blew strongly. Matron Teresa stood behind me with the ledgers and sighed. I have lived over half my life and seen too many women suffer for love, only waking up after being betrayed. Only you, mistress, have walked such a clear and sober path from the beginning. I took the ledgers but didn't look at them immediately. You are wrong, matron. I wasn't born heartless. It was only after realizing that even family ties were a calculation that I didn't dare place hope in anyone anymore. Even that spring night at Mount Changeling was filled with calculation. Do you regret it? Teresa asked. Hearing that word, I couldn't help but laugh. During the years I have lived, I have schemed and been schemed against. But if you ask if I regret it, never. I looked out at the horizon. How should a woman live? Managing a household and raising children is the duty of a wife. But what use is that duty if the husband is heartless and the son unfilial? There was a time when the girl disguised as a man traveling north and south thought that if she were diligent enough, the world would eventually look at her differently. How laughable. Men were born with permission to have ambition, yet as soon as a woman showed even a little discontent, she was accused of having no morality. The path for women in this world was truly too narrow. So narrow that could only live by relying on fathers and brothers, so narrow that one could only cling to a husband, so narrow that even ambition had to be hidden deep in the heart. So I stepped off that worn path myself. The path I chose might not be bright enough, but it was wide. Wide enough for many other women to see that we don't necessarily have to walk the path that has been laid out for us. True empowerment arises not from waiting to be saved, but from the courage to save oneself. Annabelle's journey reveals that when the world tries to reduce a woman to a mere bargaining chip, she must refuse to be the victim and instead become the player. In a society that demands submission, resilience and intelligence are the sharpest weapons. We learn that relying on others for happiness is a fragile gamble. Real security only comes from self-reliance. Do not fear walking a lonely, unconventional path if it leads to freedom. Instead of fitting into the narrow mold society provides, we must have the audacity to carve our own wide destiny. The story ends here for now. If it touched your heart or left you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share Raccoon Tale to help more stories come to life. See you in the next tale.